All right, well, before we get into the presentation, just a quick aside. I was in Colorado earlier this week, and there just happens to be a town near where I was, and it's called Louisville, Colorado. So if I say that here while I'm here for the next couple days, I apologize in advance. It's kind of been drilled into my head, Louisville. So now let's go ahead and get into what I want to cover today, which is this idea of this ID graph and how you can take advantage of all these digital channels to enable people-based marketing. So your ability to actually communicate to your customers or to people that might be your future customers. So we're in marketing. We've probably heard this quote many a times, that half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The problem is I just don't know which half. And that's still somewhat true today. But as you'll see here in a little bit, when you focus on the ID graph, this question becomes much easier to answer on where are you wasting those dollars, how can you be more efficient, and how can you be smarter about how you spend that money. And so let's kind of go through the old school way, or maybe how some of you are doing today. We kind of work in silos, right? We work in our channels. We have someone in charge of our social. We have someone in charge of our email, search, media. And all these different channels have different metrics that we try and follow. Are we getting views on our videos? Are we getting enough followers on Twitter? How many fans do we have? What kind of media content are we producing and that we're getting out there? And a lot of these networks on social are typically closed, so you don't necessarily understand who all these people are that you're reaching. Some of them may be customers of yours today, some of them might be future customers, but it's a very closed ecosystem, right? Facebook doesn't integrate with Snapchat, and vice versa. And so it can be very difficult to understand what's happening within those networks, and if you continue to work in a silo, your customers are moving across all these different channels, and so it becomes a very disjointed message. You think about email, it's typically a lot of automations, right? You can go sign up, you immediately get a welcome email. There's different kinds of segmentation that they might be using. There's these different promotional messages or newsletters that you're getting, which seems like daily now. I don't know why email marketers decided to switch that frequency up so high, but you're getting those messages on a regular basis. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the same kind of messaging that you're seeing when you go log in on Facebook and you see that same company pop up in your news feed. And if you think about the ID graph, that's what's going to start bringing these things together. When you think about media, a lot of that's anonymous, right? There's cookies, there's mobile ad IDs. And so when you're out reading a news article or reading a blog, you see that advertisement there. It's typically, they don't really know much about you. They might be doing some retargeting, so they might know what you recently viewed. But they don't understand who that is, and you could or could not be a current customer. And so that's typically dominated by Google today, especially from a search standpoint. But it's also rapidly changing, like we just heard, right? With all voice controls now, search is a very different experience than it was in the past. The way people get news content, the way they get their information is changing as well, which is only increasing the number of IDs and ways we associate to people. But the common theme across all of these is that customer profile. So we want to be able to reach our customers. We want to be able to understand who these people are so that we can provide them that best experience, provide that relevant messaging. But if we continue to work in this silo, they're going to have a weird experience across all these different channels if we don't start working together and communicate that and kind of flip the way we think about marketing to our customers and prospects. Compounding that fact, which as a digital marketer, I still find this hard to believe, but we have plenty of clients to prove otherwise, 90% of purchase activity is still occurring offline. Think about that, right? We optimize for clicks, we optimize for impressions, but 90% of people actually transacting is still occurring offline. And so if we aren't working to bring the offline world together with the digital world, we're potentially missing a very significant portion of who our people are, what they're buying, and we're missing opportunities to improve the way we message to those customers. And compounding that even more, in the olden days, right, we had a desktop computer. And there was one browser. Typically, it was Internet Explorer back in the day. But now we have a work computer. We might have a home computer. We might have multiple browsers on those computers that we use. And so now there's multiple identities just on this one machine here because there's 2 browsers, 2 opportunities for cookies to be dropped. And so we need to understand, is this 2 people? Is this 2 different people? Or is this the same? Mobile has changed the game as well. So now you have not only a device ID that's coming across, but now you have browsers on those devices as well. And so now there's multiple IDs just for the same person. We all have phones. Some of us may or may not still use a computer. But now you add in tablets and iPads. And so now there's another mobile device ID that gets generated for those customers. And again, if they're browsing, that's an additional cookie. And there's even more apps on those machines. And so when we look at some of what our clients are doing today, we typically see that most people have at least 3 devices with over 6 IDs associated to those devices. So think about that, right? There's 6, on average, 6 ways to reach a customer. There's data all tied to those different IDs as well because they're doing very different things across these different devices. Now, adding on to that even more, right? If you couldn't think it could get worse. Pinterest, Facebook, Snapchat, they all want your ad dollars. They all want your attention. Your customers are there. But those are closed ecosystems. So now those ecosystems have their own IDs. And then think about your TV at home. Do you have an Apple TV? Do you use a Roku or any of those? There's another box that's tied to an ID that's associated to you. Your car. Now that cars are becoming connected, there's going to be another ID associated with that. And who knows what's coming next, right? So as you see, if you don't start to think about how we connect these different IDs and these different ecosystems together, it's very easy for a customer to have a disjointed message. It's very easy for us not to fully understand who our customers are. And so, pop quiz, because this is always fun when there's marketers in the room. Apologize, it's early for me as a West Coaster, but maybe not for you. So we're going to do a little bit of math here. So think about the number of active email addresses you use today. Write that number down. If you're on Facebook, Snapchat, if you log into Google, like YouTube, write that number down. If you own or rent a home, add another number there. If you have a Apple TV or a Roku box or an Amazon Fire at home and you use that, count up those, write that number down. If you have a mobile device or multiple mobile devices, write that number down, including iPads and tablets. If you use apps and browse the web on those devices, add another number. And if you have multiple computers and you use multiple browsers, add up those numbers together. Now, take that number and total that up for me really quick, because I want to just see with a show of hands here. How many of you have 5 or more? All right, keep your hands up. How many of you have 10 or more? All right. How many have 15 or more? Wow. Okay. How many have 20? Wow. You guys are very difficult to reach, and I'm sure you're getting some very disjointed messages. So you can see, though, how easy it is to start generating all these different IDs. While we are on the pointy end of all that, not every consumer is that way, but you can see it's very important if we want to communicate to you. We have all these different methods and different ways. But if we don't think about how we do that from the beginning at the start, you're going to get various kinds of messaging, different information, and it might not all make sense. So as you can see, those with the 20 or more, This is why marketers today have zero confidence, basically. There's only 11% that feel highly confident they're actually reaching their consumers today. That's very, very low. And so it goes back to the point of being able to start combining these different identities together is an important factor so that this 11% can increase greatly, because if we want to improve our customer experience, if we want to have customers that are advocates of ours, we need to be smarter. We need to be able to bring these together so that we can be successful. And as marketers, we can have confidence that we're doing the right things, and that when we measure the success of our campaigns, we can feel confident about those results. So what happens if you aren't matching these IDs today? You might be reaching this older woman for your product when you actually meant to reach a mother of 2 children who are in preschool age or kindergarten, because your product is related to that. And so you've wasted media dollars targeting the wrong person. You're less efficient there. When you're doing your tested control groups, so we always talk about testing, right? If you don't have your IDs matched up properly, if you aren't thinking about your customer first, you might be thinking someone is in your test group, but they have actually ended up in your control group. Therefore, ruining that entire test and giving you inaccurate results. And so you can't measure something if you aren't doing the proper setup in advance. And so you might be making decisions around actions that occurred, but in all actuality, your tested control groups got mixed up, and you were hitting people that should have been as part of that control group. The other way is that you can't truly do cross-channel. So if you maybe only have an email address, and that email address unsubscribes or for some reason or another doesn't engage in your email, so is not opening or clicking, you have no way to reach back out to that person if you can't tie that back to a Twitter ID or a Facebook ID, or you don't have that capability to be able to use that email address and bring that across into another channel and communicate that message to your customer. And so really what we're focused on is building that identity, bringing in that data that's around those identities so that you guys have a better view of who your customers are. And again, those IDs span the digital world as well as the offline world. So physical address, you'd be surprised at how much direct mail is still a very viable tactic. Then, once you have that identity in place and you have that focus around people and customers, you can start thinking about the devices and the channels to which you want to be able to communicate to those customers. And so there's still things that optimization efforts and things you can be doing within each of those different channels and each of those different device types that you might be reaching out to. For example, if you're an auto manufacturer, you might want someone to have a desktop experience to build that car of theirs. Unless you have a really good mobile experience, you might not want to be advertising on mobile to come kind of build your ideal car. And so taking this approach, focusing on identity first or customers first or people first, then worrying about how and where you might want to reach them, you'll start to be able to answer those questions more effectively. And so that leads us into this modern marketing, as we refer to it at Oracle, and how you communicate to customers. So kind of putting this all together, if you think about just a typical day, I'll build this out really quick. Typical day of a customer, like we talked about earlier, they wake up, they sleep with that phone next to them, so the first thing they might be doing is grabbing that mobile device. So there's a mobile ID that's being used early in the morning. There's things that they're doing on that device. Could be checking email, could be reading the news. So there's activity and information being captured during that time. Are they opening and clicking on an email? What media are they viewing? Later that day, she might be online at work, taking a quick break, checking Facebook, going through the feed. So there's another ID, an opportunity to reach out to her. And there's information that's, again, being captured about her and what she's doing there. At home, she's like my wife. She's watching Grey's Anatomy, seems like forever. And so there's an ID there that's being captured and behavior that's happening at the household of what they're actually doing there and an opportunity to get your message out. On a website, she might go online and sign up. She's now gone from this unknown ID to a known ID, right? Now you have an email address. You can communicate directly to her. And while she was there on the website, you might be able to understand, based on, if you're using cookies, seeing what was viewed, what was the pages of interest as she was moving throughout the site. Did she add things to her cart? All that kind of information can be brought in. And now you've got that ability to tie that back to an email address. And so the key to all this is centralizing that data. So what that means from a very simplistic level is taking data that you have, bringing that data into a system, centralizing that into one place, and then making sure that place that it's centralized in gives you that ability to push that data back out. And when I say data, that's also people, right? Data being an ID, data being information about that ID. But having this ecosystem where you're bringing in all these different data points that were typically done in silos and bringing that into a system where it can be combined together, you can do something with that information and then get that information back out to improve your marketing efforts. So when you think about data in, there's different data that you can consider. So first-party data will be your website data, if you're tracking that information, which hopefully you are. It'll also include offline data. So if you are running a loyalty program or things like that, and the data that you're capturing offline, bringing that data in. Second-party data, best way to describe this is if you're Samsung, right? You don't necessarily sell direct to consumers. You sell through a Best Buy or Verizon stores and through the telecom stores. But the telecom or Best Buy could share information with you, if you're Samsung, about people that have bought those devices. And so that's what's called second-party data. Third-party data is going to be any of that kind of data that you can buy out in the ecosystem. So that can include demographic information, can include lifestyle or behavioral data, it can include purchase data like Datalogic's data. And it gives you this place to bring all these different data assets in, bring them together. And then there's also these IDs that you think about across those ecosystems. So you've got website IDs, you've got email addresses, you've got potentially, if you hit someone with display ads, there's different display metrics that you might want to include. If you're using email, you might want to be bringing in email engagement or behavioral data. And so these systems need to be able to combine this anonymous data. So third-party data, you don't necessarily know. It's David Hibbs that's in this particular segment. But you know that he's interested in electronics or mobile phones, and so you have that ability to reach back out. But then it also includes known data. So that is going to be all your first-party data. Someone signed up for email, they made purchases with you. This is all data that you have. It's unique to you. And so when we think about people-first marketing, it's about how do we bring together this anonymous side and this anonymous world in the ad tech space to this known individual through the marketing space, or MarTech space, as you've probably heard. And so the key to all of that coming together is the ID graph. And so this is what's going to give you that comprehensive view of your customers. And so all these different IDs that we talked about already, combining those IDs together, understanding how they're linked together. So customer signs up online, you might be able to drop a cookie at the time that they sign up or make a purchase, and now you have an email address that's tied to that cookie. So now you can use that cookie and that email address as a way to communicate back out to that individual. And so when you're able to combine first your own data, your own first-party data, you kind of have a good view of who this customer is, right? You might know that they've browsed jeans on the website. You might know that they use your app because you have to be logged into your app. And so you know that she's on there browsing information on your app, maybe potentially making purchases that way. You might know that she's also in your email program. So she's not opening or clicking, or maybe she's an avid opener and clicker, whatever that may be. So that's all your online behavior. But if you now start to bring your offline data in that mix together, you might see that, oh, wow, she purchases often in store, and she purchases jeans on a regular basis. When we combine this data together, we now have a better view of her lifetime value with us. Maybe she's one of our ideal customers. And we might be able to tie in location based on where those purchases are occurring. And so now we have a little bit more information about who she is. But because we've centralized this data, we now have the ability to layer on big data or third-party data on top of this, and starting to get a very complete picture of who this person is. And so you might be able to use data that's kind of what we call intent data. So maybe it's recent searching behavior or browsing behavior or blogs that she's been reading. And you might now start to see, wow, she only buys jeans from us, but the data's showing she's in market for activewear, right? She's an avid runner. She reads running blogs. She's made purchases of workout gear in the past. Maybe we should start using that information to communicate to her and start looking at ways to capture more of her wallet share. We've only been messaging to her about jeans and maybe how the frequency to which we message her is based on just our own data. But when we combine that with third-party data, we can now see there's other ways we can talk to her and still be very relevant to things that she's interested in. And so this is what combining the ID graph allows you to do. Brings that data together, centralizes that. You can start to understand your customer profile specifically and start making really good decisions on who you want to reach. And so when you combine that profile, and you take, let's just say, your best customers, your high lifetime value customers, and you have this other information about them, you can start to build this profile. So from a prospecting perspective or an anonymous universe perspective, you now have the ability to go back out and build that profile and target people like her. We know that she's our best customer. We know certain information about her. We want to find people just like her. And so now your media messaging to drive traffic, to drive interest amongst potentially new customers is very relevant because you have that information together. You know who that target market is, and you can be in front of just those people instead of the mass, right? You're not wasting those media dollars. And so that's one piece of it. The other piece is now that you have this profile, this information, you can start making smart decisions around your segmentation efforts. It's how do you get that data back out? And so ID graph plays a very important role there because what you would send to Facebook is not the same information you would send to a display partner because they have different ideas of what an ID is. So Facebook has a Facebook ID. You can use email addresses there you can load up to be able to reach those people. But when you want to go advertise, let's say on DoubleClick, it's cookie-based. And so you're going to need an ability to find cookies out in the ecosystem to be able to find those people and provide that relevant messaging. And so this is where you can be smart up front by identifying the customers and the profiles you want to go after and that message that you want to communicate to them. And now you can worry about which channels you use to activate on that and be smarter in the types of channels where you spend those dollars to reach those people. And so just wanted to give you a few ideas on how to think about kind of getting started with this. The main solution would be like a DMP type solution, but there's other ways that you can kind of get started down this path and start thinking about customers first. So I'm going to do on time. And so that first step, this is what we call the kind of people-based marketing framework. So the very first thing you need to start out identifying is what data do we want? And have that discussion with your teams. The next step is how do we collect that data? Or maybe we are collecting that data. And so the question is, where's that data so that we can get access to it? Third step will be centralizing that data. So where are we going to put all this information so that we can bring it all together, make our decisions, and which leads us to the next step, which is defining those people, defining your customers and audiences that you want to go reach. And then thinking about where do we want to activate on that data. So what channels and networks do we want to be thinking about when we go and talk to these people? And then how do we optimize those efforts? So since we're starting with people, we can measure the success because we see people transacting or filling out lead forms. And so we have the ability to start closing the loop and identifying, are our efforts from the beginning taking the desired actions that we want at the end? And so the learnings that you'll gather, you'll continue to optimize. There'll be new data that you'll consider, right? Maybe today you're not bringing in media data, but in the future that might be information you want to bring in on who's seen an ad and who has not. Because maybe you want to change up how you message to folks that way. But the underlying theme here is that it's all tied back to some form of ID management or an ID graph to bring this all together. And you continue to iterate and iterate on this process over and over and over. It's how you become more sophisticated in your efforts. And so identifying. So again, what data do you want to be capturing today? And where can you capture that data? So think about your website. Are there certain events taking place on your website that you want to be able to capture that information? Most common one in retail is carts, right? I've added an item to my cart. A lot of marketers want to know, what was that item? Did they actually make the purchase? Because those are opportunities to reach back out to those folks, to identify things that they're interested in, or just another method of what this customer could be looking for in the future, very near future. Offline, are there ways that you can be capturing data offline? Do you have an email sign-up process that occurs offline? So now you're going to know a customer came to a store or came into your location. It's good information to know. So you don't want to push them online if maybe their preference is to be going to the store. Mobile, do you have an app? Do you have a mobile website? Are you capturing information that these people are on mobile, are using your app, and the kind of information that they're producing within that app? Is there different engagement metrics that you want to be tracking? So an email marketer is always tracking opens and clicks. Are there other metrics that you want to be able to capture and bring back into this profile? And then the most important out of all these is, how are you actually going to measure this in the end that you were effective? Because if you don't have data that ties back to that, you won't be able to measure, are your efforts actually producing what you need? Are they driving more leads? Are they coming back and purchasing more often? Are you reducing churn because of your efforts? So think through the kind of data you need, the kind of data you want, prioritize that data, and start kind of slowly working your way through the information that you want to start building these profiles. So on the collect phase, where can you capture that data? So a lot of this is, our website. Do we have technical capabilities to be able to capture information, tie that information back? Do we have that same ability to do that offline as well? Do we run a loyalty program? Is that something we should consider? Because it will allow us to capture offline information and bring that online as well. And so, it doesn't necessarily have to be done by your team. There could be partners that you could be utilizing that helps capture this information for you. There's lots of tag management companies out there that help you capture information off website tags. There's products out there like OnRamp that allow you to take email files or CRM files and bring them online so that you can reach them on Facebook or through Google and through a video provider to be able to message those folks. And so if it's not a capability you can do today, is there a partner that you can leverage to help with that process? And then the other aspect is, what IDs are you able to capture at these different points? And do you have a way to start to bring these things together? So like I was mentioning before, on a website, maybe you require people to log in. I mean, that's Facebook, that's every social network today. That's why they require you to log in. They want you to self-identify. No matter what device and area you're accessing it, now they know it's you. And so are you looking at ways to be able to capture that? So are you looking at someone logging into my website, and now I have a cookie that's tied to that website and to that email address or that login ID? Are there other IDs that you should be considering to start to collect? Because maybe you want to start being more active in mobile. So are you using mobile ad IDs as a form of collection around the people that are visiting your properties? So the next is, where can you centralize that data? So one place is your CRM system. These are typically tied around a customer ID or customer number. It's already kind of a hub for customer information. It's more used from a servicing level, so there's other information that might not necessarily be relevant from a marketer's standpoint. But it's a good place to house information. It's meant to house information. You can use additional services like OnRamp, or you can even use like Facebook's capability where you can load up a file of email addresses that you have tied in your CRM to be able to reach customers. You can add data to a CRM, so through data append, you can capture more information through data append to enrich those profiles in your CRM system. But the problem is, if you go this route, you'll eventually kind of be stuck, because it's not meant to push data out as easily as other opportunities that you might have. It can be slow at times, and it's not really meant for segmentation. So it's a great place to put information in, capture that information, but it's really hard to define and build segments off this information and then get that information back out. But it's a place to start, right? It gives you a place to start bringing data in for the time being and starting to think about this customer-first approach. You could also look at your email marketing platform. A lot of marketers, pretty much everybody, has some form of an email marketing tool. The key here is that this platform is tied to an email address. So if you are going to start bringing in data and bringing in information, you're going to need to start working towards bringing that together to an email address ID. But just like the CRM, you can use OnRamp, you can use Facebook, you can load up those email addresses, bring those into other channels, and start to communicate those messages to customers. Typically, email is already well tied into the website. Usually it's the most common way to sign up for email is to visit the website. Depending on your sophistication, you might already be tracking cart behavior if you're a retailer, or if somebody's filling out a lead form, because an email marketer wants to build automations off of these activities already. And so this might be data that's sitting in your email marketing platform today. Just like in CRM, you can append data, so you can enrich that profile with other data elements that you can buy out there on the marketplace and bring that data in to help complete that profile. And the nice advantage of an email platform is its entire purpose is around segmentation and personalization. So you can do a lot of that activity in the tool itself and start to reap the benefits of those efforts. And some limitations might be that your email provider might limit the kind of data you can bring in. They might limit just the amount of data that's brought into the system, so you might run into some issues there. But it's a good solution if you don't really have a place to start yet today. And kind of the granddaddy solution, just because this is my baby, I focus on this a lot, is the data management platform. And so this entire system or tool is designed around a user ID. And it's designed to bring in any kind of ID that you might be collecting across the ecosystem, because the ID graph is inherently built into our product. It's built into competitive products as well. And so it's a great place to be a central hub to bring in all this data, bring in data across these different IDs, allow this system to tie those IDs together to give you that single view of that profile. Most DMPs are media agnostic, which just means you can push that data, that audience, back out to any platform. Versus if you just use Facebook, you're tied to Facebook, you're tied to Facebook's ecosystem. You can't bring that data back in, you kind of put that data out there and kind of run your efforts. Third-party data is typically built into a DMP solution. Not all DMPs out there have data built in. Most are getting that capability. But you don't have to worry about buying third-party data right away. You can start running analysis and looking at profiles using that third-party data and determine, is this information I want to be buying and using to be better at the marketing that I'm doing? Because that's what will give you that kind of 360-degree view of your customer. Because it's not just what's happening within your four walls or your property. It's also what's happening elsewhere that that customer is engaging with throughout the day, other customers that they might be interacting with, and so it really enriches that profile. The kind of issue you might run into is it could be costly, right? Depending on how advanced you are and the kind of data that you are collecting today, it might be a little bit cost prohibitive to be able to do that. But if cost necessarily isn't an issue, it's a perfect solution to be able to unify these IDs together, bring this data together so that you can be much smarter in how you're marketing to customers. And so now you have this data centralized. It's moving on to that definition stage. So thinking about this in two ways, or just a simpler way, is my prospecting audiences, my prospecting customers. They're not my customers today. I wish they were my customers. I want to go find them. And my retention, right? I know these people. I want to get them to buy more. I want them to come back if they've maybe have gone silent on us for a while. And so because you've unified this data together, you can start to define this kind of segmentation. You can identify those profiles, say, okay, she's a woman, 25 to 35, she's a fashionista, she's on the latest trends in fashion, and she purchases, I'll just say women's apparel 10 times a year. And now because this data is centralized and you're kind of running a campaign against this profile that you know is a great customer, you can suppress the customers you already know. So it's now truly a prospecting campaign. These are people that you don't already know. These are people that fit that profile, but they're not currently a customer. Where a lot of people today miss this step, and so they're spending prospecting dollars and advertising dollars on people who are already customers. Right? That's a missed opportunity from a messaging standpoint because you already know who they are. You have an opportunity to personalize that message and be much more relevant in the type of product you might show or information you might share with them. And so you can think about, from a retention standpoint, maybe their churn is a problem. So like in telecom business, people switch providers a lot, and so churn risk is a problem. And so based on their known customers, they run this information, and now they have a way to communicate out to customers and build out a communication plan to customers they believe are at risk of leaving. And so they can help reduce that, and in the end, because they started with people first, they can measure, did we actually reduce the number of people leaving our platform? And then the last step is, or one of the last steps is, where do I want to push that information out to? And so there's plenty of partners, plenty of media ecosystems out there that you can send that data. It's just which IDs you need to be using to get that information out there, to communicate that message to those people. And because you have started with people first, customers first, profiles first, and then worried about which devices and which channels to be using, you can now focus on, did we drive the results that we need? Did we get our most recent purchasers to purchase again? Did we reduce our churn? Did we drive significantly number of new customers to our business? Because you've started with people first, you now have that opportunity to measure very specifically against your efforts versus, hey, we got this many views or this many clicks. You can bring that back to business results. So when your boss mentions something like this, you can provide back a very in-depth view on, hey, we've run these campaigns, we've run this test, we saw this audience wasn't actually performing for us, so we're shifting our dollars and moving it over to this other audience that is actually performing. And so while this will probably always remain somewhat true, you can be much more educated on where and when those dollars are being most effective. And that's all I had. Thank you.